if you find yourself frequently feeling disappointed, disillusioned, and let down by other people, by what your life looks like, and by who you are, then you may need to visit your expectations. Now, expectations are part and parcel of the human experience. We all have them. They have an evolutionary function. We needed to be able to predict the future somewhat so that we could make provisions in the present. However, that being said, oftentimes our expectations can work against us. Many of our modern day expectations are creations based on our assumptions about the world and our beliefs about who we are, who we need to be, and our beliefs about relationships, who other people are and who they need to be. And I suppose they are important because, again, we have to know whether our relationships are safe or not, and we have to have expectations for ourselves. We have to have certain desires in order to drive us on. However, that being said, when we become too attached to our expectations, we end up feeling very disillusioned when they don't materialize. And I suppose it's developing a relationship with your expectations that sees them as desires as opposed to guarantees. And this is where oftentimes we become a little bit confused. We assume because we want something to be true, we want something to be a reality, that it automatically should be. And unfortunately, we're dependent on a lot of external circumstances. We're dependent on other people complying to our imagined reality of them. We're dependent on circumstances working out exactly the way we anticipated. And unfortunately, this just isn't how life goes. Oftentimes as well, our constructs and our beliefs are somewhat skewed based on how we feel about ourselves. And we have a tendency to take other people's behaviors, to take what happens in life as a reflection of how people feel about us and who it is that we are. And this can leave us feeling very disappointed in ourselves. It can leave us feeling like as if we're not loved, like as if we're unworthy, like as if we're being rejected. And again, an awful lot of this is based on your expectation. It's based on your assumption and your predictions as opposed to reality. And that's why it's so important for your mental and emotional well-being that you have an understanding of your expectations and that you're able to take an objective look at them and ask yourself if perhaps they are coming from a core belief of not being loved. Because again, when we have a belief about ourselves, we will find evidence that supports that belief. So where is this likely to be applicable in your life? Well, I suppose firstly, start off by examining your expectations for yourself and your life. We have this kind of almost sense of entitlement to a fantastic life, to feel happy all the time, to always be positive. And we tend to hold ourselves to very high standards as well as our life to very high standards. And it's not that you shouldn't have expectations for yourself, but you shouldn't tie your self-worth into, I suppose, meeting those expectations, because they generally tend to be externally based expectations, and consequently you are placing all of your self-worth on something that may not necessarily materialize. So oftentimes we need to take some of our unrealistic expectations for ourselves, which generally come from a place of perfectionism or a lack of self-acceptance, and ask ourselves, okay, what can I realistically expect for myself? And this brings us in alignment with value-based work, where we look at the person that we want to be as opposed to looking at what we want external parts of our life to look like. And again, this is a significant shift, because what it does is it allows you to be a decent human being. It allows you to focus on attributes that contribute to your own well-being, but also to the well-being of others. Now, bear in mind, this work really needs to be approached from a place of compassion and understanding and kindness, because ultimately so many of our expectations are a consequence of core beliefs of being unlovable, being unworthy, being inadequate. So we need to just very kindly begin to recognize what the significance of a negative outcome is. What does it imply about how we feel about ourselves? And nowhere is this more more apparent than in our relationships. Again, when we assume that the behaviors of others is indicative of how they feel about us, we're making it personal. The reality is people have their own lives. They're going about their own day-to-day stuff, and they don't think about us as much as we think about us. And yet we feel somehow disappointed by that. And it's just about being very realistic about what your expectations of another person's behavior are, but also recognizing that when they behave differently, it's usually not personal. It's usually about them. It's not about you. And when you make it about you, you actually put your self-worth in their hands because it's conditional on their behaviors. There is a certain amount of accountability and humility required in this work as well. I mean, if we constantly feel hard done by, if we constantly feel like everyone in our life is letting us down and disappointing us, well, the common denominator is us, and it's about recognizing that with kindness, but also acknowledging that maybe your expectations are just unrealistic, or that maybe you need to revisit some of your relationships. I mean, again, there's always a choice. I mean, if a person is continuously letting you down and you feel like as if their behavior is unjust, well, then it's your decision as to whether or not you continue on with that relationship. But you can't just stand there and stomp your feet and make demands of another person that they're not willing to meet and then blame them. You have to be accountable for the choices that you make about the relationships that you have. So it's just about being able to look at your disappointments and to visit your expectations, to visit your assumptions, your constructs, your beliefs about the world and about the way things should be. Being very aware of words like should or should not, because again, that's indicative of a possible expectation that may work against you and that may lead to disappointment. And it's not that you need to vanquish your expectations. It's about allowing them to be porous and flexible as opposed to rigid and structured. And the more you have that flexibility, the more likely you are to be able to work with the relationships that you have and the life that you have, as opposed to always feeling disillusioned, like as if you're chasing something and you're never actually getting it.